guys, Son of Wonder here. The MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, has been in a pretty bad state of decline lately. So let's conversationalize. Alright guys, so this is going to be a video more so about just the general decline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Its unfortunate decline, some of the reasons that caused this decline, and I guess coming to terms with the fact that it might not change, or at least for a long time. Now, some people might open up on this video and be like, oh, man, he's such a downer, such a negative thinker. Of course they're going to change. Some of you watching might not even think they need to change. But I feel like the general consensus from a lot of people is that there are definitely some issues going on in the MCU, and they're pretty obvious at this point. Now, whether people want to admit it or not, I think one of those, the biggest issues that's affected them is them just becoming way too woke, way too focused on identity politics and not just telling a good story in and of itself. And that's the main contributing factor for their decline. But I think there is a misconception that's like, and I think the same could be said for Star Wars too, where just because the MCU might fall off the rails, might fail, the empire that they built might topple down over time, doesn't mean the Marvel Universe in and of itself will. And I think it speaks to a bigger lesson throughout all of this. And again, this is mainly just a commentary about it. I don't have like a list form or anything like that, but just a general discussion about its decline. But I think it does speak to a larger lesson in all of this, that just because the current state of a franchise is basically destroyed doesn't mean that we have to just disregard it or forget about it entirely. Now, I think that when it comes to Marvel, all these franchises, they've done it to themselves, basically. The decline, the lack of success, the lack of interest, the slowly gaining lack of interest over time has been their own fault. And you have all these media sources out there, these news outlets that just constantly want to blame the fans, call them names and stuff like that. But it just does not, it stopped affecting people. It stopped gaining the attention it used to, and fans are like, oh no, what have we done? No, it's what have they done? They have basically just ruined themselves. And like I said, it's the woke thing that I think is the main cause. It's also just in general this idea that's, I think, also inspired by the woke thing, but it's this idea that we don't have to honor the source material. We don't have to honor what these fictional worlds and stuff used to stand for, that we can just do our own thing and people will love it. It's this hubris that these studios have had for a while now that has just become their downfall completely. And in the words of Count Dooku,
twice the pride, double the fall.
And I think that is exactly what's happened here. And I think that at a certain point, I've deliberated about this a lot. Like, these worlds mean a lot to me. They have my entire life. Growing up, I loved Spider-Man. I loved watching Batman, the animated series. My dad was the biggest Batman fan ever. He loved Star Wars, and because of that, I love Star Wars. I have loved Star Wars. I have like a massive lightsaber collection. I love Star Wars. And you know, back to Marvel, like, I watch Spider-Man all the time. Me and my mom like have seen basically all the Spider-Man cartoons, at least to some extent, and for each of them. And so I love the universes in and of themselves because at one time they all stood for something that was really important and really inspirational, inspired by biblical values, even though some people might be oblivious to that. And, you know, I don't like, you know, it's not like it's obvious, but I think that there were these general morals and these general core values that were represented in a lot of these worlds, and they've gotten lost on a lot of people too, mainly in the industry, the people writing this stuff. Now, a lot of these people who write like the new Disney Plus MCU shows haven't even read the comics. They haven't even done the research, and it's hilarious because I was like looking up jobs the other day of like what kind of job would you be interested in if you were into superheroes and stuff. And one, like, in the one that said like superhero writing, for like movie writing or whatever, it literally says have a extensive knowledge of the source material. That's hilarious because that's been a failed job requirement for a long time now, and it's open. It's admitted. It's not like a conspiracy theory like some people say it is. It is literally has been said by the people and the writers in these positions. And they'll give all these excuses for, like, oh, when we want to have this perspective, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't make sense. No matter how you slice it, it doesn't make sense. That's another one of the main contributing factors, is that Marvel, for the past, ever since Endgame, they've just been choosing they've been choosing such unqualified talent. Like, often, the reason they'll pick these people is because they get to control whatever message they get to send out via these people. And they stopped being concerned with telling a story that was actually uplifting, that was actually inspirational, that actually had the character going through struggles that everyone could relate to, instead of just forcing an agenda down their throat. No, and that's never what these superhero worlds were meant to be about. You look at the original Spider-Man comics, very simple. It's Stan Lee's original idea. Just a teenager who, like lots of teenagers out there, who could relate to, like, his issues of, like, he wanted to find a girlfriend, but he was a nerd, and he wasn't, popular with the other kids and stuff. And so he was trying to create a superhero that was relatable to everyone, and it had nothing to do with, like, preaching some political thing or whatever. It had everything to do with being an inspiration to, like, especially, and it's a similar inspiration that Batman, in the Batman stuff. Similar lesson taught there is that, you look at Spider-Man's origin, it was his fault that Uncle Ben died, and that's the point, is that, like, with great power comes great responsibility, and, like, instead of using the trauma to take it out on the world and just, like, well, if I can't have this, or if I'm treated this way, then I have to treat everyone else this way. And instead of using that to become a villain, he uses it to become a hero. He uses it to say, well, my uncle taught me, with great power comes great responsibility, and I need to uphold that, and instead of using my powers for bad, or even my own, like, that was what was funny, is that Spider-Man wasn't doing anything evil. He was just using his powers for his own self-interest, because for so long, he hadn't been able to do a ton of stuff for himself, just because of, the things he was interested in stuff. Like I said, he wasn't popular with the kids, and after, the spider bit him, he's like, oh, I can do all this stuff now, I can have all this fame now if I wanted, and it was more selfish than anything else. And so it wasn't just a lesson to not become a bad guy, it was a lesson to not be selfish, period. And now, with a lot of these other heroes, quote, heroes, unfortunately the message just gets lost, and, like, especially, like, She-Hulk, like, there is no selfless message in that show. It's just like she's always worried about her problems, complaining about her problems, blah blah blah, never taking accountability for anything. And it's just that's like the mortal opposite from the original Spider-Man message. And yet these people still control the same universe, the same universe that Spider-Man was placed in, and yet now it's these people who don't have the same values that Stan Lee clearly had. They don't have the same just normal sense of morality. And that's what's caused them to completely miss the mark and completely fail to read the room on what fans want. They constantly are doing gender swaps. They constantly are doing race swaps for no other reason than to do gender swaps and race swaps. And people have pointed this out multiple times, and yet there are still people who don't want to listen. If you reversed it, if you turned a character who was a black person in the comics into a white person in the movie, people would lose their minds. But then they turn the white character from the comics into a black person in the movie, or, they turn the person who was a guy in the comics into a girl. They treat it as this big thing, when, again, if you reverse that, people will be like, what? Come on. Like, no one wants, like, jumping into, like, DC, no one wants Wonder Woman to become a guy. No one wants that. No one wants Wonder Man in DC. No one wants Black Widow and Marvel to become a guy. Nobody would want that. That would be so entirely stupid if they did that. And yet they've done that to all these other characters, and yet somehow they treat it like that's okay. Wrong. Double standard. Not okay. And I think, honestly, it just comes back to the sense of morality over time has just been decaying. People have just continuously lost, like, oh, is this really that bad, or is it just, a false perspective or whatever? Like, no, it really is that bad. Certain things that are just obvious just get lost on people. And, I'm a Christian. I don't expect everybody to have, like, my core Christian values, but I also think that a lot of what, this country was built on was certain moral values that were inspired by the Bible, whether people like it or not. And I feel like we've only seen the evidence of once those values gets lost on people, it ain't good. Once those values start to dissipate, it ain't gonna go well. And some people might be like, oh well, it's just a fictional universe. It's not real. None of it's real. None of it matters. At the end of the day, we all have our jobs and our politics and whatever that, and the other thing. And I would strongly argue against that, because I think that, there are a lot of people who watch the news out there. There are also a lot of people who love Spider-Man. There are also a lot of people who love Batman. And, just certain things, I feel like entertainment, at least in the industry as it stands now, entertainment is always going to speak more louder to people than other mediums might. And I feel like the mediums that we could be using, especially as a Christian, my calling is to spread the gospel to all parts of the world. That's what Jesus said. And I feel like one medium that's been ignored by a lot of Christians is Hollywood, is the movie industry, is these fictional universes that might seem trivial at first just because they're not real. Like, if it's somebody's passion, then God cares about that, and He wants to spread that in a way that will reflect Him to others. And if it's a tool that can be used, it should be. And it's not in the sense of agenda, because I feel like, Jesus spoke many times in parables. Parables, you'll find if you read most of Jesus' parables, in the parables themselves, they never say directly anything about praying or like even talking about God a ton or anything like that. Like, there wasn't a ton of religion in the stories of the parables themselves. It was just that through the lessons of the stories, through the actual characters presented in the stories, these stories taught lessons. But again, in a natural way, not in a way that beats it over your head. I have a problem with many, oh my gosh, so many Christian movies. They basically do the exact same thing that the people on the other side, that the woke people do, where they'll just beat the message over your head and say, hey, yes, pray this, pray that, believe, and they don't do anything in with this sense of subtlety. It's too in your face. It's too in your face. The same way when you don't want woke messaging in the Hollywood movies, in a Marvel movie, when they stop, like in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, when Falcon at the end basically stops to give a speech about how the very obvious terrorist somehow wasn't a terrorist and that they shouldn't call her a terrorist, blah, blah, blah.
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
That kind of thing. It goes the same way on both sides. And so I think that, movies like Lord of the Rings, movies like Star Wars, and the original superhero comics with Batman and Spider-Man and stuff, these were clearly characters, even if they were flawed, even if they made mistakes, that were meant to be a symbol of something to aspire to. And you recognize that they made mistakes. Obviously, Spider-Man made mistakes. Obviously, Batman isn't perfect. But none of us are. And all of us make mistakes. And that's why they were relatable. But this new brand of wanting to bash people for not agreeing with their political stance, which most of Hollywood has the same political stance, is just garbage. And it's not the way you try to, first of all, Hollywood is in no position to, preach to anybody. And I think most people have a sense of that. Yeah, you're Hollywood. You should not be telling anyone what to do. You're an entertainment business. And their job is to entertain, and if they can, just teach genuine moral values. It's every human's job, is to just teach genuine morals, no matter what you believe. But these people don't seem to get that. And that is basically a lot of what goes into MCU, especially as they've gotten lost on that. But when you when you go back around, like I said at the start of this video, just because the MCU is on a decline, they've got Fantastic Four coming out next year, they got Deadpool 3 coming out this year, And, you know, a lot of people, when new projects will come out in the MCU, they'll be like, hey, the MCU is saved, this one was actually good, you know, whatever. One project does not save an entire franchise. A shift of mindset and an apology from Kevin Feige and from the people working at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Marvel Studios. We're sorry for treating certain characters the way we have for the past few years and making such garbage like the Marvels. No! Like, an apology would be great, because that's one thing that they've been terrible at for the past few years, is just showing any ounce of humility, like, yeah, we messed up. But, and even when they do, like, kind of say, like, yeah, we sort of made this mistake, blah, 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 it's never the actual reason, it's just the reason that they want to use as a scapegoat, as they want to use as, like, an excuse. Like, oh, well, we've just had an oversaturation, we decided to make too many projects, which is true, but it's not the main reason, and they don't want to admit that because they're so drunk on the message, they're so drunk on the ideology, they don't want to see anything beyond that. And so, even though we do have potential, like, okay, maybe Fantastic Four could be good. I really don't like the idea of Pedro Pascal being Mr. Fantastic. I'm just going to say that. Maybe Deadpool 3, you know, that has a lot of potential to be good. When it comes back to the bottom line, it's like, if Disney Marvel really wanted to move away from the politics and really wanted to go back to telling good stories, there'd be a few projects that you know are solely agenda-driven that haven't come out yet that they would have just canceled on the fly. They would have canceled Ironheart. They would have canceled Agatha. They would have Agatha, whatever the mess it's called now. They keep changing the name. I think now it's just called Agatha, which is just hilarious to me. You go through all those name changes and just, oh, it's Agatha, whatever. And yeah, there's a few projects that's like, okay, let's be honest for a second, you should have canceled that if you were really moving away. But they keep giving excuses and they keep making the same mistakes over and over and over and over and over again. And I think it's just going to come back to bite them in the butt at the end of the day. So my takeaway from all of this is I will continue to hope that somebody in Marvel will have enough sense and logic to say, hey, this route that we've been taking ain't the right route and we need to go a different direction. I will continue to hope that somebody has that sensibility and can take that forward and it'll turn the whole thing around. They'll cancel the projects they need to cancel and just start making good content. In my mind, there was a very easy and simple thing to do after Endgame that they didn't do. You take all your legacy characters, you take the ones that you didn't use, the great ones, like the Fantastic Four, like the X-Men, Ghost Rider, Silver Surfer, take all the other Marvel characters that weren't in the first three phases and just ride that train after Endgame, after you've used a lot of the Avengers stuff. But they didn't do that. Instead, they chose to take a bunch of random characters that nobody cared about and then put them in the MCU, and it wasn't even close to as good as it could have been. The good news is, Marvel's been around a very long time, and they have had a lot of time to make actually good stuff. We'll always remember the first three phases of the MCU. I think those are, you know, mostly you have a few ones in there, but most of those movies are at the least watchable, and most of them I think are good. Especially Phase 1. Phase 1's my favorite phase, I think, because it's the simplest, and it's probably at the point of when Marvel Studios was the most humble as a company. They weren't willing to take as big of a risk or try to preach to anybody. Ugh. And when it comes to the cartoons, I feel like a lot of people don't know about, you know, you got Iron Man Armored Adventures, you got the Spider-Man 90s animated series, you got Spectacular Spider-Man, so many Spider-Man cartoons. But you have a ton of actual Marvel cartoons that I feel like, you know, if people get tired of the MCU's just sludge that has been coming out lately, and I have a bad feeling might continue to come out, but, you know, we'll see. Their track record is not great. But if y'all get tired of that, there's a lot of other Marvel cartoons out there, some of which I might do rankings on. I might do like a list of ones that you might not know about that you might want to watch. If you don't want to, you know, take any more of the politics and you just want a good show, watch with your family. A lot of these cartoons are going to do that job. There's some animated movies out there, and it might do the same thing for DC and Star Wars, you know? I mean, I feel like most people know about the Star Wars stuff that's out there, but yeah, there's like stuff that's good in Marvel that I feel like a lot of people could go back to and really enjoy if they don't know about. Because Marvel is a phenomenal universe. I think Stan Lee made such amazing characters. There's such lessons to be learned from stories about the Hulk and Spider-Man and Iron Man and Thor. There's always like these relatable things he would put in each one of these characters that made them such great characters. And that's why they've lasted the test of time. That's why people are still interested in them. That's why people want to see Tony Stark come back as Iron Man and Steve Rogers come back as Captain America. And they want to see a proper Hulk, a proper Bruce Banner Hulk, not stupid Professor Hulk. And, you know, they loved Spider-Man No Way Home. I like Spider-Man No Way Home is like my top 5, like 5th favorite superhero movie, because that's like the one movie after Endgame that they did like, we're going to do this and we're going to do it right and we're going to tell the story in the way it needs to be told and not focus on politics, and they nailed it and it was awesome. If they would only just do that with these other things, it would be great. But we have things like No Way Home, and we have things like these other cartoons that do capture what they were going for, what Stan Lee was going for in the comics, as well as the other people who created the other heroes, like Jack Kirby, created Captain America, helped create, I think he just created on his own Silver Surfer. And so we have all that stuff, and that stuff is great. And I think the more we focus on, you know, that stuff, these universes might not seem so sour to us anymore just because of the current stuff that's going on now. But that's basically my take on the entertainment industry as a whole in general, but especially the MCU, especially Marvel, especially their decline. But we'll see, you know, maybe a miracle will happen. Maybe the Lord will just cleanse out the people working at the MCU, whether they just change their mindset or they just, you know, get fired and then somebody else comes in. But, you know, we'll see. But we definitely need a cleansing, and we definitely need God back in movies, honestly. We need Jesus, and we need genuine morals to come back. But the cartoons had those, and so if you want to go check those out, look them up. Most of them are pretty good. But thank you guys for watching. Have a very blessed day. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. Goodbye. And that's a wrap.